The transmission had been disseminated across every known system, proclaiming a declaration of war so unequivocal that it reverberated throughout the entire galactic community. The Corran Dominion, an empire encompassing thousands of star systems, had just revealed its intention to annihilate humanity. Admiral Rannick of the Corrans had articulated this with his customary arrogance. "You are an infestation, a mistake of evolution. Your kind will be eradicated from existence. The Dominion will ensure that it is as if you never existed." The message resonated through space, reaching human colonies, military outposts, and Earth itself. Billions of humans received those words, and billions clenched their fists in response. For most species, such a declaration would have signified surrender. The Corrans had obliterated numerous civilizations before, their war fleet deemed unstoppable. They anticipated humanity would plead for mercy and submit, but instead, they received a reply. A solitary video was transmitted back to the Dominion's high command. The sender was a human soldier, battle-worn, standing before the devastated city of New Moscow on the colony world of Grom 4. His armor was charred, and blood, both human and alien, streaked his face. He had witnessed the atrocities committed by the Corrans, and he smiled. "Congratulations," the soldier stated, his voice steady, almost amused. "You have just declared war on the galaxy's deadliest species." He then severed the transmission. The war had commenced. The Corran Dominion had remained undefeated for millennia. Their war fleets surged like a tempest across the galaxy, consuming planets, enslaving species, and annihilating those who dared to resist. However, they had never engaged in combat with humans before. On Grom 4, the first genuine battle of the war was already in progress. The Corrans had anticipated a swift and uncomplicated slaughter. However, they found themselves ensnared in a bloodbath. Major Elias Carter wiped the perspiration from his forehead as he crouched behind a partially destroyed barricade. The streets were strewn with Corran bodies, their dark blue blood staining the ruins of New Moscow. The alien warriors had expected to march through the city without opposition. Instead, they were being decimated by human resistance fighters employing guerrilla tactics, makeshift explosives, and sheer, unyielding fury. "Status," Carter barked into his comms. "Still holding, sir," came the response from Lieutenant Vasquez. Her unit had been defending the western flank, preventing the Corrans from encircling them. "But we need more ammo. Those bastards just keep coming." Carter grimaced. They all understood the grim reality of the situation. Grom 4 was doomed. The Corrans had dispatched a full invasion force, and no assistance was forthcoming. Earth's fleets were still mobilizing, their orders clear: make the Corrans bleed and hold as long as possible. "And if you must retreat, ensure you leave them a parting gift," he instructed. Vasquez chuckled darkly, already preparing the charges. Major Carter redirected his focus to the battlefield. In the distance, core and war machines rumbled through the city, plasma cannons demolishing entire buildings. Yet the humans did not fight fairly. They struck from the shadows, set traps, and lured the Corrans into ambushes. For every street they captured, they paid in blood. The Corrans had believed that humanity would be an easy conquest, but the reality was proving otherwise. Across the galaxy, news of the battle spread, and other civilizations, long subdued by the Corran Dominion, watched in anticipation. Disbelief enveloped the notion that humans, mere newcomers on the galactic stage, could resist. Then, an unexpected event transpired. The Dominion's High Council received a report that sent chills through their very cores. The humans had somehow commandeered a Corran warship. Against all odds, a small human strike team had infiltrated a Dominion battleship, slaughtered its crew, and seized control. No species had ever achieved such a feat before. For the first time in Corran history, they experienced an unfamiliar sensation: fear. The KD's Varak, a Dominion battleship engineered for planetary sieges, had been one of the most formidable vessels in the Corran fleet. It was designed to be invincible, a representation of Dominion supremacy. Now it was in the hands of humanity. Inside the bridge of the captured warship, Captain Daniel Rohr stood over the command console, his hand trembling from the sheer insanity of their accomplishment. He surveyed his team, Marines, engineers, and hackers, most of whom were still smeared with Corran blood. "We actually did it," whispered Lieutenant Harper, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Damn right we did," Rohr replied. "Now let's ensure it was worth it." The Corrans had underestimated humanity's adaptability. They believed their ships were too intricate, their systems too alien. However, humans had spent centuries reverse engineering everything within their reach. The moment they gained control of the ship, Harper and her tech team had delved into its systems like scavengers on a fresh kill. Rohr turned to his communications officer. "Establish a direct line to Admiral Kasari. Earth needs to be informed about this." The transmission was dispatched within seconds, traversing through secured human military channels. It did not take long for a response to emerge. The visage of Admiral Kasari, the leader of Earth's defense fleet, materialized on the main screen. For a fleeting moment, her typically cold and calculating demeanor faltered, revealing an emotion that oscillated between shock and exhilaration. "You are telling me," she stated, her voice controlled yet sharp, "that you have hijacked a Corran battleship?" Rohr replied with a smirk, "We did not merely hijack it, Admiral. We are on the verge of utilizing it." The Dominion was in disarray. No species had ever succeeded in stealing one of their vessels before, which was both an affront and an impossibility. The Corran High Council was in turmoil, their previously unshakable confidence now rattled. However, humanity was not finished with their humiliation. Instead of fleeing with their prize, Rohr and his team turned the Varak against its former masters. As a Corran fleet approached Grom 4 to bolster their ground forces, the stolen battleship unleashed its firepower. The first ship to succumb did not even raise its shields, having never anticipated that one of its own would turn against it. A direct hit from the Varak's forward plasma cannon obliterated it. The second ship managed to respond, but it was too late. Harper had infiltrated the Dominion's fleet security codes, disguising their communications for crucial minutes. The enemy hesitated, confused and uncertain whether the Varak had been compromised or if this was a ruse. That moment of indecision proved costly. The human fleet, now mobilized and advancing rapidly, dropped out of hyperspace. For the first time in history, a Corran fleet was ambushed on the ground. Major Carter and his resistance fighters observed as fire rained down from the sky. Initially, they feared the worst. More Corran forces were coming. Reinforcements arrived, but then Carter's calm demeanor was interrupted. "Major, this is Captain Rohr, aboard the Varak. We are giving these bastards a taste of their own medicine." Carter gazed at the sky, observing the once invincible Dominion forces in a state of panic. A slow grin spread across his bloodied face. "About damn time," he muttered. The impossible had occurred. The Dominion had declared war on humanity. However, for the first time, they were beginning to understand their error. They had not merely declared war on another species. They had declared war on the deadliest fighters in the galaxy, and humanity was just getting started. The battle over Grom 4 had been a massacre, but not for humanity. The Corran fleet, once perceived as unstoppable, lay in ruins. What remained of their warships was retreating, broken and humiliated. On the surface, the last of the Koran ground forces were scrambling to evacuate, but Major Carter and his resistance fighters were determined to prevent that from happening. The humans had endured days of suffering under the Koran occupation, witnessing their cities burn and their people executed. Now it was time for payback. Carter stepped over the smoldering corpse of a Koran officer, his rifle still hot from the last burst of gunfire. His comm unit crackled to life. "Major, this is Vaz. The last of them are holed up near the spaceport, trying to escape." Carter spat on the ground. "Like hell they are." He turned to his fighters, most of whom were battered and exhausted, but still standing, still fighting. "They think they can do this to us and just walk away?" he growled, his voice filled with pure fury. "They came to our world, killed our people, and now they run? Hell no, we finish this." A chorus of war cries erupted as the humans charged forward across the galaxy. Word of Grum 4 spread like wildfire. The Koran Dominion, once an invincible empire, had just experienced something unthinkable, a defeat at the hands of an inferior species for the first time in their history. They were no longer the ones erasing civilizations. Instead, they were the ones being hunted. The stolen battleship Farak, now fully under human control, was not merely a trophy, it was a weapon. Rar and his crew were already making modifications, stripping out Koran technology and replacing it with human ingenuity. The first human-operated Dominion warship was on the verge of becoming something far more dangerous. Then came the transmission that changed everything. Admiral Kasari stood before the United Earth Military Command, her face broadcast across every colony, outpost, and ship. "This war is no longer about survival," she declared, her voice cold and commanding. "The Koran Dominion thought they could erase us. They believed we would break." She paused, allowing the silence to hang heavily in the air. They were wrong. Her eyes burned with a primal intensity. "We are not just fighting back. We are hunting them now." Cheers erupted across Earth and every human colony. This was no longer merely about defense. It was a declaration of vengeance. The humans were not just surviving this war. They were on the brink of winning it. Deep within Dominion space, the Koran High Council was in chaos. The room, typically filled with calm, calculating rulers, had transformed into a battleground of arguments and fear. This should not have happened. Admiral Rannick slammed his fist against the table. The table was set, his mandibles flaring. Humans were expected to be an easy conquest. However, we underestimated them. One of the warlords growled about their remarkable ability to adapt and retaliate, which is unlike anything we have ever witnessed. Now, another counselor added, his voice cold with realization, "They are coming for us." For the first time in the Empire's history, the Korans faced an adversary they had never encountered before, an enemy that refused to kneel, an enemy that learned from its defeats, and an enemy that, when pushed to the brink, did not merely survive but evolved. The war had only just begun. The first human counteroffensive in Dominion space commenced with fire and fury. Utilizing the stolen Varak as their spearhead, Earth's forces executed a surgical strike deep into Koran territory. The target was Velrath, a heavily fortified supply world crucial for fueling the Dominion's war machine. A full-scale planetary invasion would be tantamount to suicide. The Korans had orbital defenses, garrisoned forces, and an entire fleet stationed nearby. However, humans had never fought fairly. Instead of an invasion, they opted to send a message. Roar and his team piloted the Varak straight into the system under false Dominion identification codes. The Korans, still reeling from their defeat at Grom 4, were unaware of what was approaching. Then, as the Corran fleet finally recognized who was piloting the ship, the humans activated the kill switch. Before the battle, Harper and her tech crew had rigged the Varrock to perform an action no Dominion ship was ever designed to execute: detonate its entire fuel core in a controlled chain reaction. Rar's last transmission to the Corran command was, "Simple congratulations," he said, his voice laced with dark amusement. "You have just lost another planet." The Varrock was on a collision course. The impact was cataclysmic. A stolen Dominion battleship, overloaded with sufficient plasma fuel to incinerate an entire fleet, detonated directly above B-Wrath's main supply hubs. The shockwave severely crippled the Corran war effort in that sector. Fuel depots were obliterated, and entire supply chains were shattered. The Dominion had spent centuries perfecting conquest, yet no one had ever dared to confront them in this manner. And this was merely the beginning. The Corrans were not only losing ships and planets, they were losing something far more detrimental: their reputation across the galaxy. Species that had once been cowed under Dominion rule began to observe closely. If humans could fight back, if they could inflict wounds upon the unblemished, then perhaps they were not alone. Insurgencies began to erupt on Corran-controlled worlds. Enslaved species that had long accepted their fate started to rebel. Supply lines were sabotaged, Corran patrols were ambushed, and military commanders found themselves hunted within their own territories. The High Council had ruled through fear. Now they were the ones who felt fear. The High Council convened once more, their once proud chamber now filled with unease. "We cannot allow this to continue." Admiral Rannick growled, his mandibles clicking in frustration. "The humans must be eradicated, every last one of them." "But how?" another counselor demanded. "They fight like nothing we have ever seen. They sacrifice ships to take down fleets. They destroy supply chains instead of claiming them. They do not fight for territory, they fight to kill." The words hung heavily in the chamber. The Corrans had always considered themselves the apex predators of the galaxy. However, they had now awakened something far worse: not prey, nor an enemy, but a species that, when pushed to the edge, transformed into something monstrous. They had awakened humanity. Back on Earth, Admiral Kasari stood in the War Command Center, gazing at the holographic battle map of the galaxy. The Dominions still controlled thousands of worlds, and their fleets outnumbered humanity's forces by a ratio of 100 to 1. Yet, the war was no longer about sheer numbers. It was about strategy and instilling fear. Kasari turned to her officers and stated, "We do not need to defeat the Dominion in open warfare, we simply need to break them." A new plan was taking shape, a war not focused on territory, but on annihilation. Their supply chains, command structure, and even their belief in their own power would be dismantled. "We will take it all," she declared, looking at the officers surrounding her, "the most formidable strategists humanity had ever produced. Let us demonstrate what occurs when one declares war on the deadliest species in the galaxy." The war had transcended mere survival. It was now about dominance, and humanity was just beginning. The Corran homeworld stood as a fortress, the heart of an empire that had ruled unchallenged for centuries. No species had ever dared to attack it until now. Humanity was no longer merely engaged in warfare, it was sending a message. Earth's military command had crafted a strategy so audacious, so utterly insane, that no Corran admiral could have anticipated it. Instead of gradually wearing down the Dominion's outer defenses, the humans intended to strike at the very heart of the beast. The plan? The assault on the Corran homeworld was executed with such simplicity and ferocity that it instigated the collapse of their entire empire in fear. The operation, dubbed Executioner, commenced as a small fleet of human stealth ships successfully navigated past the Dominion's outer patrols. The Corran had dedicated decades to preparing for invasions, not for assassinations. Their defenses were tailored to combat massive armadas rather than a handful of strategically placed human operatives. Among these operatives was Captain Rohr, the individual who had previously stolen the Vark, now spearheading a new mission that was even more perilous. The strategy was to infiltrate, create chaos, and then escape. Rohr and his team penetrated the outer space stations orbiting the Corran homeworld, strategically placing detonations along critical points of the defense grid. The humans had discovered something that no other species had managed to uncover. While the Dominion's technology was formidable, it was not invulnerable. Their power grids and supply networks were all susceptible. The detonations were meticulously synchronized, and with a single command, a resounding boom echoed as half of the Corran's planetary defenses were rendered inoperative. This marked the commencement of the true assault. The Corran anticipated an invasion. They were prepared for fleets, soldiers, and ground battles. Instead, they faced annihilation. The initial human strike force did not land. Rather, they unleashed a barrage of attacks. Human warships, smaller and swifter than Dominion battlecruisers, fired planet-cracking railgun rounds at vital infrastructure sites, obliterating military installations and reducing supply hubs to mere dust. The Corran command structure descended into chaos as generals shouted orders that no one could comprehend. Warships scrambled to launch, only to be intercepted and destroyed before they could even exit the atmosphere. The humans were not engaged in a battle for territory. They were dismantling an empire. The Corran were oblivious to how to halt their advance. Deep within the palace of the Corran Emperor, the once mighty ruler of the Dominion gazed at the hollow feeds in disbelief. "This is impossible," he whispered. "They are primitives. They are weak." A nearby officer quivered as he spoke. "My lord, the humans have breached the door." Smoke and fire engulfed the chamber as Rohr and his team burst in. Human soldiers, bloodied and marked by battle scars, aimed their weapons at the most feared leader in the galaxy. Rohr stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "You declared war on humanity," he stated coldly. The Emperor, once so arrogant and untouchable, now cowered before them. Rohr raised his pistol. Big mistake. One shot, and the Corran Emperor lay dead. Across the Dominion, news spread like wildfire. The Emperor was dead, their homeworld lay in ruins, and their fleets were shattered. Without leadership and the fear that kept them in check, the enslaved species of the Dominion finally revolted. Planets erupted in rebellion, and military officers were assassinated in their own command centers. Slave armies turned on their masters, slaughtering them without mercy. The Dominion was disintegrating, and the humans did not relent. Months later, on a devastated Dominion world, Admiral Kasari stood amidst the wreckage of what was once the greatest empire in the galaxy. A war that should have spanned centuries had been won in mere months. She surveyed the assembled human soldiers, their faces worn, yet victorious. "They believe they are the apex predators," she remarked, turning to gaze at the burning remnants of the Dominion. "They are mistaken. For the first time in history, the galaxy had a new ruler, and the humans were not conquerors. They were hunters. For centuries, the Dominion had ruled through fear, but now humanity had assumed their position. Some civilizations celebrated their arrival, while others trembled, for the galaxy had learned a terrifying truth. One does not declare war on humanity, for if they do not face a war, they face extinction.